Hi, everybody. I'm Tony van Rooij, and I work at the Trimbos-instituut in the Netherlands, where I work in a team that focuses on gaming, gambling, and digital balance. And from that capacity, I have been involved in a project that basically looked at behavioral design in video games and aimed to communicate what's going on in games, the behavioral design in games, towards policymakers. So in that sense, it might be a good project to start up this conference because it's very much an overview. We do not envision that we have all the wisdom for all the complicated questions that are going on, ranging from loot boxes to manipulations of behavior. But we have attempted with our project team to provide an overview of what's going on, and I hope that I can get that across in the brief time that we have here. And now, externally, beyond the Trimbos-instituut, the co-workers involved were Max Birk from Eindhoven Technology, the University of Technology, and Simone van der Hof from Leiden University. And in that sense, the collaboration was also interdisciplinary because Max is far more oriented in the game design aspects. I come from a background of public health and psychology and originally gaming addiction. And Simone van der Hof has a lot of expertise in child's rights. So the entire process was very fruitful in learning about each other's disciplinary insights. So that's a recommendation if people engage in this type of work. Now, firstly, I'd like to take the stage back to myself and my own gaming history. And as some of you know, much has changed and in gaming over the last years and over the course of my life. So I've been able to see a lot. And actually, when I was growing up, I was playing Prince of Persia. And that solved a lot of digital balance issues by itself, because right now we're concerned about kids staying inside. But believe me, after 45 minutes of Prince of Persia, you want to go outside because you start the game, you fall into the first pit, and then you die, and then you do it again. And eventually you get to a final stage, and then you drop into a pit, and you're back to screen one. So the game design was horrible. But unfortunately, it didn't have microtransactions, so we were spared that element at that time. My point being is that there was a lot of friction in these games, and the commercial pressures were outside of the game still. So you just bought the game, and that was case closed, end of transaction. Now, obviously, that has changed, and for me personally, a very insightful moment was when I was playing the introduction of Grand Theft Auto, the recent version, in online. And actually, as part of the onboarding experience, they asked me to purchase some clothes, which normally is for me something my wife makes me do. But here I was playing a brand new game, and they made me exercise, play, script the environment of purchasing some clothes. And the first time is free, and the second time you need to buy it with in-game currency, which you need to purchase in a game external situation. So that was a very definite sign that pressure was being placed on me. I was being trained to perform a certain behavior, which was not necessarily in my best interest, and it was definitely not enriching my gaming experience here. So that's something that's going on. And more recently, I was very enthusiastic about Diablo 4, and where we received as gamers a lot of guarantees that microtransactions will not be paid to win. Now, unfortunately, in that process, they managed to somehow screw up my enthusiasm for the game, because as it turns out, these cosmetic things that are now supposed to be bought by people were also part of my fun in the gaming experience, and now they're all behind paywalls. So at some point I was just playing, and then I had no goals anymore, so I quit playing. So which is, I guess, also one way to restore digital balance. But I think that's a very clear sign that the industry is very much in stress and figuring out what the good way is to go about these new financial models. But as a public health researcher, we also have some very serious concerns about what's going on. And I guess some of the leading principles behind our project were the following. We depart from the assumption that the video game and media design impacts health and well-being. Now we view health broadly as social, mental, and physical health, so not just your physical health. And we also depart from the assumption that the behavioral impact of video game design is fairly poorly understood right now. And it can obviously involve beneficial design, as case Prince of Persia, or if you want to be more positive, games like Stardew Valley or other mental health supportive or just super relaxing games that are out there. But it can also definitely be harmful, as illustrated by pressures that happen in battle passes to just keep playing, or play when you don't feel like playing, or temporary content that disappears if I don't show up at a certain time. So if you're involved in the gaming space, then no doubt you'll recognize some of this pressure. And I'll go to the next slide. Our aim was to visualize that for policymakers and also provide a taxonomy, which basically goes from design, just design decisions and design elements, all the way to stresses that this tension, this new tension is creating in the interplay between industry and end user. Now, we very briefly in our visual, we summarize the entire game industry. I know, horribly rough, but as the interplay of publishers, distribution platforms, and developers, and just lumped them together, and we drafted 4, let's say, principles or drivers for their behavior from that list. And I hope they all make sense. First of all, logically speaking, a company wishes to maximize earnings, right? They want to make money. They need to conform to the law. This is for companies very often a central driver. You want to be compliant to the law, otherwise you get fines, and that's not good for your company. Thirdly, obviously, you need an enjoyable product. You want to maximize enjoyment, because otherwise, why are people coming to your product? They won't buy anything if it's not enjoyable, if it's not bringing them something. Now, we're aware of hard fun and that games can be engaging, but people need to get something out of them, right? And now lastly, you have, the underdog, I would say, creating a responsible experience. Now, this is where the tension seems to be, right? Because, I can count on one hand the companies I've seen kill the goose with the golden eggs, just to make a more responsible product. And it is our opinion, or at least it's my opinion, that we're very, very much now in a monetization-driven situation, where we have tipped the balance in favor of over monetization. And this is not necessarily malicious, but as an industry, if you run into something that seems really fruitful and you're a big stockholder company, then logically speaking, you're going to optimize for that until you get feedback. And some of this feedback is already happening, but it's not a lot, right? Now, if we stretch this apart a little bit, you can draw a line basically from common monetization models, pay-to-play, subscription models, free-to-play, to behavioral design patterns. Crudely speaking, very often they revolve around money or time, right? Playing this weekend, playing at a certain day, habitual daily play, or monetary patterns like investing in a battle pass upfront to commit to the number of days that you're going to play for the next period, or vice versa, just buying loot boxes and just gambling on a specific outcome, in which we also know that people are sensitive to this. And you can recognize in the implementation of these systems, you can recognize very quickly techniques that we use in public health to change people's behavior. For example, to discourage them from smoking or to reduce their alcohol use, which we know are fairly effective in changing people's behavior. So I won't go through the whole thing because that's in the report, but I guess one of the main conclusions is that tension between monetization and gamer well-being, we believe, is not an academic issue and is actually happening at scale and rapidly multiplying. And we've seen as the poster child for this the loot box discussion, but our position on that is that the loot box discussion is just an example of behavioral design, and maybe one that's already being phased out to some degree, but it won't be the last. In fact, battle passes are just as interesting in terms of behavioral manipulation, and perhaps just as bad, I would say. Now, obviously, this can be used for good as well. League of Legends has been experimenting with points for being a good sportsman in the game, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a bad thing. But the question becomes, what counterbalances the, let's say, runaway monetization situations? Now, it seems to be that the most effective feedback is coming from gamers themselves. So we've seen if I go back, we've seen the Battlefront controversy, where EA was eventually forced to apologize. Sorry, we didn't get it right. Where a AAA game was being sold, and as it turns out, you couldn't even play Darth Vader until you shoved some additional money in the direction of the company via small purchases. Yeah, and logically, if you buy a Star Wars game, you want to play Darth Vader, right? So yeah, that pisses people off. But then that's not really a good way to deal with ethically responsible product design, right? If you just wait for consumers to get angry and then backpedal a little bit. And otherwise, we just see small companies like the company behind Warframe experimenting with this, and just gonna take a breather for a second. And the company behind Warframe, they removed a microtransaction system because they thought they had accidentally created a fruit machine, a slots machine. So then it's up to the responsibility of the individual companies and their ethical framework, moral framework to backpedal on this. And that's, maybe we're missing a code of conduct, and like Celia said, but the pressure seems limited, and policymakers are struggling to understand what's going on here, while as researchers we see that people are experiencing pressure, right? So now, just going to the gamer side, obviously there's a large group of gamers, because this is a big product, to some degree, fortunately so. But if you have a large audience, you also have vulnerable gamers in there, and you need to deal with that, right? And not everybody is equally equipped to deal with behavioral pressure. So pressure to play at certain times, psychological manipulations like losing everything you build up in the game, or pressures to pre-commit to 30 days or playing just before your exam period. Not everybody's equipped to deal with that. And there we see, and I personally am of the opinion that the protective measures that are being taken are extremely underdeveloped. So there's no identification of vulnerable gamers. I know this is difficult with privacy, but it's not the ultimate excuse to do nothing. You have a big project and you need to deal with the people. Now, not very often the gambling industry is an example, but in this case, at least in the gambling industry, they have acknowledged that a segment of their population is vulnerable and deserves additional protection. And in the gaming industry, I think, well, maybe this conference is part of that. The industry is slowly coming, but I think it sort of comes with the territory, right? If your business model shifts in the direction that a small minority of people are paying for your entire product, then obviously they deserve increased protection, because if you don't, things are gonna end up badly for certain individuals. Now, just to round this off somewhat more broadly, gamers are very, if we go back to the 4 lines we have, money, ethically responsible gaming, enjoyment, and what's the last one? Respectful treatment on the gamers end. People are very willing to pay for something, at least if they get value for money, right? Nobody likes to be manipulated. And this is where this is a bit of a canary in a coal mine. You see a lot of stress with the gamers, right? Because they feel they're being put under pressure. There's a lot of feedback in the community about pay to win, but also other manipulations. And there you see that there is friction going on. People don't think they're buying something in an honest, transparent, and fair way. And I believe to some degree that's true. And their legal expectation of a safe place to play, to some degree, is also being violated, especially if you deal with underage children, right? Because many of the commercial mechanisms that we see, like battle passes, where you see what you're missing. If you only pay now, then you're getting the whole thing right now for free. That's tough to resist as an adult, but for children, you could make a case that maybe you shouldn't be putting them in that position, where they have to buy something on the spot, or they're confronted with regret, right? So, yeah. Long story short, in the project try to visualize and contrast the expectations from the gamer or the gamer's parent and the industry drivers that are going on, segmenting them into the four subjects and indicating what we think is the most interesting place, the place where these expectations and company drivers actually meet and conflict. Now, I think I don't have the time to go completely into this, but yeah, they meet in the middle, and the audience is broader than just super stable people. Now, as a translation of this report, we have both communication efforts towards policymakers, as you see in the visual, as you see in some of the taxonomy boxes, let's say the elements of our framework, which is a starting point, not the final point of an analysis here, but it does illustrate what's going on. We also provide a policy agenda for some, I guess, action points on the government side, which can involve contact with industry, which is, I guess, a good starting point to understand what's going on, but with sensitivity to the fact that there's also commercial interest here, right? And as we also know from the gambling industry, commercially strong industries have the capacity to develop a strong lobby, which is not always held positive in and by itself. So we do think that there's a role to be played for independent research here. And this is arguably difficult, both in gaming, gambling, and media, because a large part of the data is industry internal. And there's a very limited technical framework or operating framework for researchers to independently evaluate this data. Because as soon as you start asking difficult questions, logically, the companies get into complicated internal discussions between the PR department, the legal advisory board, and the marketing department and whatnot. So it becomes complicated. So researchers need help with that. So I think that beyond an ethical framework for the industry, we also need some groundwork and operating principles for dealing with industry. And this is not just a gaming situation. This also holds true for contact with Meta, TikTok, and gambling companies. And there are some examples, but we really haven't arrived at a workable conclusion for any of these industries yet, I think. Now, finally, we have some research advice, which basically focuses on all three of our domains. So we advise that we develop a better understanding of what's going on with the industry and in product development, like Sebastian also said in his talk. So understanding what's going on technically, so that we don't come up with suggestions that could never work. On the user side, we need to understand what's going on with gamers in not just product data, but what's going on actually in the home environment, and why do certain solutions like parental controls or organize your own limits, why doesn't it work, why does it work, and where's the interplay of changing your product versus supporting individual autonomy and controlling your own behavior, and for which people. So we need to invest in understanding the user side. And finally, the tension in the middle. What's really, here we get to the code of ethics, I guess. What's really a workable boundary for putting pressure on people's behavior? And just to make this really concrete, is it okay to ask people to log into your game every day? Or is that too much? And at what age does it start to be normal? Is it okay to ask people to pre-commit to a battle pass, and then if they don't play enough, they don't have enough points to purchase the next one for free, so they have to shell out money again, which can be a problem for, let's say, students with little money, but high pressure in school. So those boundaries are few and far between. And that really requires us to look at this interplay of what's fair and what's reasonable, and also what's legal. So purchase this now or you lose it forever is very close to unreasonable economic situation or exploitation from my perspective, especially if you implement it in a children's product, right? So anyway, I guess that's the overview for me. By all means, read the report. 15 minutes is a bit short to introduce this, but we have 2 days of conference ahead of us to to go deeper into this from various speakers, I hope. So I hope this was helpful as an introduction. All the materials are in the public domain, and I'm happy to answer additional questions.